and welcome. I'm Warren Johnson, and now we're at episode number 3 of Dallas Watch. Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss bad history. As I've repeated so often before, I was just sitting quietly in my condo on Turtle Creek when I got word somehow that they were going to remove the statue of Robert E. Lee and Young Rider in Lee Park. I'll go deeper into that in another one, but it's the start of this one. I couldn't understand why they'd want to do it. It seemed like such a harmless statue or whatever. But it was a pretty statue. It was almost very Norman Rockwellian, if that is a term. It looked like a place you'd go and have picnics and have that big statue. It'd be in some nice portrait or something. But they decided to tear it away. And tear it away they eventually did, even though we put up a pretty good fight for it. It was bought for $1.5 million. But I was trying to figure out, why did they want it removed? Everybody seemed so happy with it. It was such a part of Dallas. The hippies back in the 70s, I think there was a riot out there, so to speak, in 1973. They used to have concerts out there. The place used to be packed. They'd crawl all over that statue. Everybody was fine. If anybody was going to have a peace movement or a civil rights movement issue, which was just the decade before, the 60s was the civil rights movement, something would have happened then, but it didn't. Can't figure out why, but all of a sudden people got agitated. So I began to look into why it had to go now. I know now why it had to go, or how it went, not why it went, but how it went and how it happened. That I'll cover, and that is a blockbuster. That I'll cover in another episode. I'm going to double check my facts first, but when I give that to you, you're going to be blown away at the hubris that happened with this. But anyway, so as I was listening and watching and reading some of the texts and Facebook posts and so on and so forth about those that wanted it gone, said it should be gone, I began to realize this is bad history they're spouting. They really do not know what they're talking about. Now, I'm not a scholar, I'm not an expert, but I do have some street cred with conservation and preservation. I am a history minor at the University of Texas at Austin. I was involved in the saving and getting special historic designations from the state for the old Collin County Courthouse. If you drive to downtown McKinney and see that now, the reason it's still there is because of me. Me and a group of little old ladies. Actually, the little old ladies were the power behind it, but I was just the front guy. They'd tell me what to say, I'd go out and do it. But we destroyed a political career of Ron Harris, who was the county judge. This goes back to the year 2000. And I was even kicked off the Collin County Historical Commission because of the stance I took. I was also involved in helping Sunset High School get the same historic designation, not quite as much drama as the last time, but did that in 2015. I was very, I think, helpful in that. I think I was instrumental. I hope the people I worked with would think the same thing, and I think they do. So anyway, I've got the street cred. So the reasons people were giving just seemed to be so ludicrous if they were thought about a little bit deeper. And I'm going to tell you about that. They were saying that it was the Jim Crow laws, that these statues were put up in the late 1800s to the early 1930s to intimidate blacks, to intimidate African Americans, to make sure that they stayed on their side of town, so to speak, or that they did not try to gain any more rights than they were trying to get. It was done to intimidate. Well, thinking over that a little bit, just reading a little bit of history, anybody would come up with, I'd hope would come up with, unless they just want to have bad history, after the Civil War, which was a war, any war is devastating economically. That is an historical fact. That is never in doubt. It never comes out to be an economic boon, except for a few, maybe the arms suppliers. But as a whole, an economy of a nation is devastated after a war, even if they're the victor. Well, the South, the 11 states of the Confederacy, were devastated. They were invaded. They were brutalized. Sherman's march to the sea, Sheridan, the whole thing was about to destroy the South, not just the Army of the South, but any way they could feed their soldiers, any way they could house their soldiers, any way they could make ammunition, any way they could make anything, they would destroy it. That is historical fact. You can find that on any website, Google it or anything. The South was brutalized. So the war ends in 1865. So did everybody just pick up their tools and start rebuilding? No. Reconstruction took place for, I think, about 1976, 1977. And they were, not only had they been invaded in the early 1860s with Reconstruction, they were occupied. They were occupied for 10 years, almost nearly as the way that many other nations are occupied after a victory. But this went on for 10 years, where they forced people to take an oath of loyalty. If they elected certain officials, if the United States government didn't like those officials, they'd have them disband. And if they didn't like the way they were making money, they would make them stop that. So finally, in 1876, 1877, Reconstruction ended, so we were back to the United States again. And the South began to actually recover at that time economically, but they were still an agrarian nation, and that doesn't recover as fast as, let's say, a manufacturing nation. So as you still had widows and orphans of Confederate soldiers who were killed. Confederate soldiers who were not slave owners. I had a Confederate relative. My great-grandfather was a 15-year-old boy who went off to war right near the end of the war. He certainly did not have any slaves. He was just a boy. So you had all these men and boys who were killed. They were sons and brothers and husbands of people who were now getting older and who wanted some kind of memorial. Now they could finally express it. They couldn't express it right after the war. They had to hold their grief inside. Now they could express it. So these little widows and orphans would literally put their pennies together, and they would save up enough money, and they would pool the money with like-minded people, and they would have a statue created, just like the one that's out there at Pioneer Cemetery here in downtown Dallas. That was put out there in 1896. Lee's statue was not put up until 1936, but still, there's that Jim Crow era they talk about. But for better or worse, actually it's for worse, and it is what it is. But the racial lines in 1896 and up through 1936 and even beyond were clearly defined, and nobody crossed those boundaries. So I cannot for the life of me figure out why widows and orphans who could use that money for such other things that they probably needed more would do that just to keep blacks and African Americans on one other side of a town, or from not coming to a certain area, or to make sure that they didn't get uppity, so to speak. So that would have been a waste of money. It just doesn't make any sense to me that they would do that. Now let's go to 1936, really right in the middle of the Depression, hadn't quite started recovering yet. So this little group of ladies, the Dallas Southern Memorial Association, and I've got a bone to pick with them, and there'll be another episode regarding this. But those ladies at that point in time put together $50,000 in 1936. It's got to be millions of dollars equivalent in today's money. And so why, again, the laws of the land, I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Civil War, an 1896 Supreme Court decision, still standing, which was separate but equal. I mean, you had to be separate, but you had to be equal. So there was no need to take that amount of money, that kind of money, and go through all the stuff that they needed to do, which was find a place to put it, which was to get the city of Dallas to donate parkland so they could put that on there, and that statue, and to have a big production where they could invite the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to come down and dedicate it. I mean, it's a lot of hard work other than that and raise money. Why would they do that when that money could have been used so much better if it were just to keep blacks and African Americans on a certain part of town and to make sure that they didn't get any wild ideas about becoming integrated with society? That just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But that's the kind of bad history that was put out there. And again, I've talked a little bit in a previous episode about the media. This is where the Dallas media, the Dallas Morning News, D Magazine, and Dallas Observer put those little talking points out there. and their minions who feed off that stuff took that and ran with it. And that is just bad history. But it's, again, at another time we'll discuss even more about Lee's statue and probably the Confederate Memorial in Pioneer Cemetery as well, which we have a lawsuit going on with the city of Dallas right now. But I want to thank you for watching. It's good to walk too. But I want to give you this email address. You can certainly give me some feedback. It's dallaswatch2020.org. Love to hear from you. Love to get some feedback. And I'm going to say so long to you. Have a good day, and meet you back here for episode 4. Thank you and goodbye.